Collaborative printmaking is a creative endeavor in which an artist is able to fulfill their aesthetic vision with the help of a master printer who has developed extensive technical skills and a deep understanding of the printmaking process. Each of the printers included in Albuquerque Museum's exhibit, The Printer's Proof, Artist and Printer Collaborations, have had rich and diverse careers as master printers, working with a wide range of artists from around the world. The demand for fine art prints grew in the 1960s, and the establishment of major workshops such as Gemini and Tamarind Lithography Workshop in Los Angeles set the stage for the establishment of print shops around the country. The printers interviewed here are all part of an important lineage of printers who emerged from major print shops. Their careers span from the 1970s to the present, and each of them have spent much or all of their career in New Mexico. Printmaking is a highly involved career that takes years of training as well as a considerable infrastructure. Depending on the type of printing a shop or master printer does, a range of presses, chemistry, workstations, and materials are needed. Choosing to work as a printer is a commitment, and each of the printers followed a unique path to come to where they are today.
My name's Jennifer Lynch. I took my first printmaking course in 1979. And Bruce Manwaring at Syracuse University was my teacher. And I fell in love with it. I was in a thing called studio research. So I was doing all sorts of different modules of, sculpture and metalsmithing and all sorts of things. And the printmaking just took me. So I started following that, and I haven't stopped since. I've done a lot of photography, I've done a lot of painting, but printmaking has always been the common thread. It's always been there since '79, and then now I'm a printmaking teacher. I also teach art practices in the painting department over at the community college, and I work with people in my personal studio. When I first started printmaking professionally, it was at Robert Blackburn's. And so I was a lithographer. And I had really had the opportunity at both Syracuse and Kansas City, who had huge stones, wonderful equipment, big stones, but then when you leave school, to do lithography is very, very challenging, because it's just, I have a press. I mean, I could play the grand piano and it'd be easier to move, But lithography, it's the stones, it's everything. So I really pulled away from litho, not because it's not my first love, but I just really couldn't do it with the sinks and everything and levigating. So I started learning more about etching, and then when I worked at the College of Santa Fe in the Center for Safe and Non-Toxic Printmaking, there were so many people that came through there, it was after my graduate work, that were on the cutting edge of the safe and non-toxic. And so for me, I always considered it, because I wasn't making any money, that it was sort of a PhD program in printmaking. I love learning how to make things, and it's how to make things in the best way they need to be made.
My name's Marina Ancona, and I have been a printmaker pretty much my whole life. I come from a family of artists, and I think that's really how I got anchored in art. And my father also did printmaking, so I have this kind of history of looking at his prints. He was Mexican-American and grew up going back and forth to Mexico and kind of always showing us lots of images, and we grew up looking at a lot of Rufino Tamayo and Diego Rivera. And when I had gone to Boston Museum School for 1 year, and I had come back here to Santa Fe for the summer, and luckily I was able to get into a class with Ken Noland. And he brought us to Ron Picasso's shop in Santa Fe. And I didn't ever think I was going to be interested in printmaking. I thought I'd be a painter. But coming into the print shop, I loved the community right away. Being around a group of artists, seeing people working with all kinds of different components, and just seeing the medium in process hooked me right away. And I left Boston Museum School to come and study full-time being an assistant printmaker. And then I just continued as I wanted to learn by doing, basically. And in the print shop, I could do that. And I could learn directly from artists, which was how I wanted to learn.
I wound up in Berkeley, California, taking classes there. And then I applied to get to the Art Institute of San Francisco and got into there and got a degree in about 3 years, a BFA in the printmaking department from San Francisco. I wanted to start a business after college. We had a good group of printers in the print shop. The print shop was really happening. I studied a lot of different types of art, painting, filmmaking, sculpture, drawing, of course, performance art even, which was very big at the time. But I liked the idea of making prints, and we had a really good group there. But San Francisco was just too expensive. My sister was coming out to New Mexico to study massage. And she said, "Oh, do you want to come with me?" I said, "Yes." And I knew there was printmaking out here because I knew Tamarind was here. I knew there was a big art scene in New Mexico.
I have an undergraduate degree in sculpture. And, you know, from at UNM, and Tamarind was right across the street. And I kind of got to know some of the Tamarind people, and I liked the idea. I had taken a couple classes in printmaking in my undergraduate degree thing. And I decided to apply to Tamarind. I got a letter of acceptance. It was a great thing for me to go to Tamarind.
And it wasn't until I got to graduate school that I started learning lithography. And I have no idea how what clicked for me, but something clicked. And then after I finished graduate school, it was like, okay, now what do I do? So we were fairly close to Albuquerque, and Vera mentioned that, you know, well, why don't you apply to Tamarind, you know? Check that out. So we came down here and made an appointment and had a tour, and it was, they were working on a Kenny Price print. I never forget this beautiful Kenny Price print. And they were proofing it, and there was all these blends and lots of color. And I applied to the program, and I got in, and then it just, you know, that started my career basically.
It was funny how I even got into lithography. It was like I went to graduate school and I had known about etching and silk screening, but I never knew what lithography was. And I walked by the print lab and I looked in and I saw these people printing off a stone and drawing on stone. What the hell is that? And so I walked in and talked to them and they explained it to me. So I took a course in it. And that was it. I was hooked. I just really, really loved lithography and, you know, was in it from for a long time. I was at Tamarind, then I left, then I went to Illinois to teach at Southern Illinois where I got my master's. I didn't teach, I just opened a workshop called Wagner where we brought in artists and I printed for them. Then from there I went to Illinois State and opened new Normal Editions workshop. And it's still going, and that was a long time ago, where they would, you know, there was one printer and he trained students, and it's worked out pretty well from what I understand. And I was very happy to start these, and fortunately I knew enough artists that they would come to these schools and give a lecture and stuff like that. And I did that up at in Durango at Fort Lewis College too. And it was great. I'd bring in the artist and they'd do a print with me and work with talk with the students, give a lecture and so forth, and then we'd do an edition of 20 and the school would get 10 and they'd get 10.
Ron Adams attended a number of different art schools in the 1950s and 60s, including UCLA and universities in Mexico, honing his skills in drafting, technical illustration, lithography, and engraving. He received a certificate of trade proficiency from the Otis College of Art and Design in 1963 and went on to become a successful master printer, first working at Gemini in Los Angeles. While there, Adams worked with artists such as Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, Frank Stella, and many more. After relocating to New Mexico and operating Hand Graphics for 13 years, he sold the business to Michael Costello in order to focus on making his own work. Adams' artistic career flourished after selling the shop, and his work is found throughout the United States, including the National Museum of American Art at the Smithsonian, the African American Museum of Dallas, the Bronx Museum, and many more. His thorough attention to detail and superb draftsmanship are found in all the works, which focus primarily on the human figure. Adams passed away in November of 2020. He left behind an important legacy of printing collaborations and artistic excellence.
And Ron Adams had come from, he was born in Detroit, but he lived in Los Angeles, and he was painting murals at the Olympics, 1968 in Mexico City.
Oh, wow.
With Sergio Moyano, and after that Ron actually studied with Gemini and Ken Tyler out in Los Angeles to learn how to do lithography. And Ron's wife at the time was from New Mexico, and she wanted to move back here. Ron was a stone dealer after he had done work at the Olympics. So at that time, litho stones were fairly rare in the United States. So he would go down to Mexico and get stones from all sorts of places and bring them up to the United States and sell them. And that was the way he was making a living for a while. And then he decided to open up a shop. And Robert Arber was around at that time. I believe that they were partners in the very beginning. I got there in about 1981. I came to New Mexico. I got a job at Hand Graphics, and I worked there for 5 years under Ron Adams. And after 5 years, he wanted to get out, had to, and I found a way to buy the business from him, and I've had that ever since.
For much of the history of printmaking, printing was mostly seen as a technical and mechanical process that was not on par with painting or sculpture. Still, there have been many artists from Dürer to Picasso who have utilized printing as an artistic expression in its own right. Most of the master printers interviewed here began their path to printing through their own artistic practices, which they maintain while also working with other artists to create fine art prints.
For me, it was always in the beginning of my career thought that I had to choose between being an artist and a printmaker. And as I get older, I think it's more important actually to do both, because I think it makes me a better printer to be an artist, and I think it makes me a better artist to be a printer.
I think most printers, deep down, they're always artists, because if they aren't and they haven't studied the art, they're not that great of a printer, because they don't know where to go with certain artists, because they haven't had the education or studied, you know, what art is all about and stuff. And this is an art, you know, lithography is an art.
I've always been very graphically interested in, you know, in real fundamental design concepts, you know. And I have become a colorist. The color has become, so now the plates are something to hang color on, whereas before they were really about the structure, and now it's all about the color. And I did not anticipate that at all. And it really became, and with the viscosity prints that I do, it's an undulated surface. So I'm using different durometers of rollers and different viscosities of ink that reject or repel each other, or attract or repel each other depending on what you put down first. So it's like peanut butter and jelly. And if you put the jelly down first, it resists the peanut butter. And if you put the peanut butter down first, it's easier to get the jelly on it. I never just wanted to be a printer for other artists, where some people, that's what they focus on. They become a master printer. They don't have any desire to do their own work. I also do my own work. So it's a way for me to facilitate my own work.
Collaborative printmaking involves a particular synergy between the artist and the printmaker. Each one brings their unique perspective to the process. The technical knowledge and skills of the printer allows them to help the artist achieve their aesthetic vision. Printers may also be challenged and pushed in new directions as artists want to experiment and push the boundaries of what's possible in printmaking.
I love the collaboration because you learn a lot by working with other artists and getting into their head and seeing how they see and think and what they're up to. And then when you're doing these problem-solving things to get to their aesthetic, it creeps into my stuff, you know? If I've learned something really new and innovative by working like with Charlie Strong, you know, which we'll look at his prints, and the stories they have to share. You know, many of the people that I've worked with have been around longer than I have, and some of them aren't around anymore, and that's the sad thing. But they've enriched my life, the stories.
Oh, for sure.
Working on those
Yeah.
projects.
No, it's great when they can. Then, you know, Nicholas come back quite a few times over the years. Hung Lu is another artist that's come quite often. And yeah, I mean, you just, after a while, you kind of know exactly what they want. And
That's where collaboration comes in. And boy, I liked collaborating, especially with people that had never done a print before. You know, they come in, they had no idea, and they'd look at a stone, and they just stared at it for the longest time before they were, and I'd always give them a small test stone so they could get the feeling of it, and you know, we could put washes, and then before you know it, they were sitting there drawing. I said, the stone is not going to bite you. Just be careful you don't drop it on your foot. But, and you know, 9 out of 10 times in all my years of printing, I hadn't had any failures.
After I did an apprenticeship with Michael Woolworth in Paris, I came back to Santa Fe and worked with Michael Costello at his shop, Hand Graphics. And that's where I really anchored my knowledge in monotype. And through his, the way he kind of set the shop up to work with artists, the way he collaborated with artists, I learned so much about how to collaborate with artists, how to let artists be, how to create, how to ask help from other printers.
The greatest collaboration you have are with the people that work in your shop. If you're lucky enough to have a crew, that's number one. I mean, none of the additions that I made came from me alone. I mean, sometimes I'd print it alone, but any of the bigger projects, I mean, I had 7 employees. I had, and a lot of people came through there. You know, Marina worked for me for a while. Marina Ancona, who's part of the show. Mitchell Marty worked, and he's worked in the shop. Michael McCabe, Jeffrey Morin, Brett Miller, Susan Cornish. I mean, the list goes on, and Sandy in the frame shop. And really, that collaboration is really kind of critical. So I wanted to say that first of all. There were people that I worked with that changed the way I did things. And they've been friends for years. A lot of times, people become close friends, and you do different things together. One of the people I really liked in there that I would like to talk about is Forrest Moses, who I started doing monotypes with before I owned the business, when he worked with Ron Adams in the very early days. We worked every year up until about 4 or 5 years ago. when he was unable to continue doing it. So he had been there for quite a really long time. And we did a lithograph together that's in the Santa Fe portfolio. He really was not a litho person. We did an etching. He did an etching with Ron, which was okay, but not great. But in the monotype, he was just masterful. So he has stood out as someone that over a long period of time, I've done a lot of work with.
And I was working on a project that I had to go to Houston for, on just a different project. And so I stopped through here, just as a tourist. And I met Judd's assistant. She drove me, I was by myself, around, showing me the different buildings. You know, in the course of this half hour or something, she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a printmaker." She said, "Really? Well, who have you printed for?" And I said, "Well, Bruce Nauman," and you know, a couple of names I dropped. And she said, "Well, Don has always wanted to set up a print shop." I gave a presentation. They said, "Well, great, if you want to set up a shop, we're interested in." At that time, the director of Chinati was Judd's girlfriend. She was this German woman, Mariana Stockbrand, who really is a very cool lady. So I had to give a presentation. She asked me, said, "Okay, here's what you've got to do. You've got to give a presentation in front of the board of Chinati." So I researched everything, including what kind of fan you should have in the print shop, you know, everything, the press, tables, just everything it would take. And Don, he said, "Well, pick out a building," and there are a lot of buildings over there, and at that time, a goodly number of them were empty. So I picked out one. I thought, "Oh, that'll make a nice print shop." And he said, No, I've got one for you." You know, it was already. So after giving this presentation to the board, which I was a little nervous, you know. So I got in front of this, at the end of this big table, and there are these people, and they all had a yellow pad of paper and a sharp pencil. Not one of them picked up the pencil, you know, the whole time. So I gave this presentation of what we would need, how much it would cost to get going, you know, so they, you know, that all went through, and then there was no questions. Nobody said anything. So I said, "Well, thank you for your time." And as I was just about to leave, Judd said to me, he said, "That is a really nice belt buckle." And it was a nice belt buckle. And I said, "Well, thanks." And I walked out. 2 weeks later, I got a check for the full amount that I had proposed that it would take to set up a shop there. So we set up a shop in one of the buildings over there. And unfortunately, that was like 91, I think. And then Judd died in 93. And we did a couple of prints in that shop with Judd. His idea of the shop was that, kind of like Chinati is, that he would invite his friends, buddies, art compatriots, to do a print. How Chinati was set up, like Oldenburg was a friend of his, Dan Flavin was a friend of his. So he invited them to come and, you know, take a building and do something with it.
Tamarind Lithography Workshop was founded in Los Angeles in 1960 by June Wayne, who sought to revitalize the art of lithography in the United States. In 1970, Tamarind moved to Albuquerque and became Tamarind Institute, a division of the College of Fine Arts at the University of New Mexico. Tamarind sought to foster collaboration between artists and printers, train new generations of master printers, and to elevate the art of lithography. Robert Arber, Steve Britko, and Bill Lagattuta all completed their printer training at Tamarind, and Britko and Lagattuta each went on to serve as master printers there.
When I first came to Tamarind, you go through the, you know, student thing, and then I started doing some acid tints with artists. And no one had really been doing them at all, not for years and years and years. And it was everybody, wow. What it was you had a stone, you get a flat black, and then the artist goes in with acid and gum and etches his own image. And I've got some of those here. And that's the artists that I worked with those. I did some with shoulder, but I sold those years ago. But the Jim McGarrels I did are really, really, really nice. And then after that, that was it.
Yeah.
There was no more people wanting, because it's too technical. You know, you give them a pencil and they'll draw, or a paintbrush and with touche and stuff, which was great too. It's what they want to do.
Tamarind was a great foundation, you know. I always talk about Tamarind being, you know, it's a great foundation. When you leave Tamarind, you really know the basics about lithography, and through and through. My first job was in Minneapolis after I left Tamarind.
There was a big difference between Tamarind LA and when they moved to Albuquerque. Innovations, there was some, but it was, I think there's more going on now, but it was stone lithography. And then they did some zinc plate, which I don't know anybody that's doing it today because there's easier ways. Zinc plate was like, why do we doing this? But they actually built a machine, Takich, who was just starting when I was there. Great, great operation. I don't know, today, building some of the best press. He would come over to Tamarind to repair the presses, and he was at the engineering department, structural engineering, and he was helping students make models and doing, you know, various things. And he would then come over to fix a press or something. And then he decided, or, you know, through some coercion, I think, to build a press. And so that really changed. That was the big change, because the presses they had at Tamarind, there was one that was not turn of the century, but a really old press, probably 1920, I'm guessing. And then there was a press called the Charles Brand, and then there was another press manufacturer who I'm not remembering his name. But, you know, by having Takich start to get into it made all the difference in the world, and still does today.
I think Tamarind kind of gets a bad rap about this traditional technique. I mean, true, we're teaching students, you know, the basics of lithography, but that's not my job. You know, my job was to work with the artists that we invited. I never felt like we were just promoting traditional lithography, you know, and you know, when the artists came in, you know, whatever they wanted to try, I was willing to try, you know. It wasn't like, you know, no, we just have to draw on a stone, or no, we just, you know, it can only be this size, or, you know what I mean? It was like, okay, I'll try whatever you want to try. And Tamarind is known for, you know, one part of the program is you have to do a research project. And it's always about something that you hear about other printers trying, or why isn't this working, or it could be, you know, our inks aren't working that well, what's wrong with the ink now? It's like, so we're always like diving a little bit deeper into, you know, making lithography. How can we make this medium last longer, you know? Why are the products starting to deteriorate? Why aren't things quite working right? Stuff like that. Or how can we get this or that to happen, you know? So students are always thinking about new ideas, research projects to explore.
Monotype is one of the 5 primary types of printmaking, and has only recently gained traction on par with the other primary modes of printing: relief, intaglio, lithograph, and serograph. They're unique in that an artist paints directly on a plate and only a single print is made from the process. Printers, including Marina Ancona and Michael Costello, have focused much of their careers on monotypes and continue to explore the expressive and wide-ranging possibilities of this type of printing.
Monotypes are just painting on plates and running it through the press, and you get a picture, or you can go in and rework them and paint on them and stuff like that. I remember when the monotype craze hit, and I think it was Fritz Scholder mostly that really jumped on the bandwagon with that, because he worked with a printer down in Phoenix. Rizvani is his name. You know, Fritz started having shows with monoprints and so forth, and then I think he did some with Ron, and Ron kind of got people interested in it. It's an easy way for artists to get their images stuff. Where lithography, you know, you have to draw, then you have to proof, and then you get your image, and you have to redraw if you have to, and so forth. Where monoprints is the direct.
The most direct.
Oh, definitely.
I like monotypes because you can do a lot in a day. Not every artist, you need clients, and not every artist can do the trick in their head where they color separate out the different prints and do a red plate, a blue plate, a green plate. They don't think that way. And the printer can help them do that. Some people are very natural at it, and it's very good. But I saw it as a way that I could do workshops, have 6 people at a time in the studio. You could have them there for a week. As long as you had 6 or 7 artists lined up to do a workshop, it was viable. So that was kind of a business decision, but I also liked the process of it. I liked lithography, don't get me wrong, that was my first love. And we did a lot of lithography. We did we did some etching additions. We did photogravure. We did computer prints that were based in a computer, and then I printed them by hand. So I got into monotype printing on heavy level. We did a lot of that. I really pumped up that end of the business, and it's still my main thing.
I've really chosen to do mainly monotype. I feel like that's been my most experimental place. That's been the place where artists seem to be most drawn to be able to cross-pollinate. And I bring in woodblock in a monotype way often as well. But I would say for the most part, monotype has been the stronghold, and it used to be considered like the stepsister. It was definitely considered not a contender, and I'm so happy to see that after, I think Nicole Eisman had a show at the Whitney with a whole wall in the front room of monotypes. Usually monotypes and other prints are always segregated to the back room. It was so exciting to see them have the power that they can have and be put in the front of the room.
The printers included in this project have each worked with hundreds of artists over the span of their careers. Creative collaborations can require long hours in the studio, troubleshooting and proofing prints. Each of the printers have worked with the same artist several times over the course of many years, often developing lifelong friendships in the process.
Well, I would say easily to answer that was Nauman. And I just feel, I mean, I got to know him through another friend, and I really liked the guy, and we hit it off. And so I asked him, would you like to come and do a print? And he said, well, okay. And one of the things, I did probably 5, 6 different prints with him. And all right, I'm going to tell stories. I love the idea of taking the stone to the artist, because I think that the artist is most comfortable in their own environment, in their own studio. So I have taken stones up steep steps, you know, the big litho stones. I've taken them to some pretty difficult places. So I took this stone out to Pecos, out to Nauman's, and it was in the middle of the winter, and I had this old van. I can't remember which of my old vans it was, but so I had it on a rolling table. We rolled it out of the back of the van, and we were trying to push it through the mud, you know. So we're pushing this stone on this cart, and it was just getting bogged down in the mud. And he said, I know what we'll do. So he hit one of his horses and put a dolly around the leg of the cart, and then towed with his horse the stone. He had drawn this stone, and I was proofing it, and I was sending him proofs. And what I was doing, which everybody does, when you're finished proofing for the day or printing, you blot the ink off with newsprint. And so just to say, I think a sheet of newsprint costs 6 cents. So to save on 6 cents, I would flip it over, and I think a lot of printers do that, and then use the back side. Well, it turned out that it had a thing called the ghost image. So you printed it, and it was like, and then flipped it over, and then printed it again. It was like, hey, that's really cool. So I thought, wow, this is really nice, because it really filled the image in, because you're getting 2 images. One is a mirror image, and one is a right reading image. So I said, how do I tell Bruce Nauman what he ought to do? So I rolled up the proofs in this newsprint that had that double image on it. And then, you know, he got the tube, and we were talking about that print, and, you know, the colors, that's that right? And, you know, he liked everything about it. And he said, but I want to ask you, how did you do that other one with the double image on it? And I went, got him. So by accident, really. And but I wasn't going to say, hey, Bruce, I know what you could do. You know, not only because of the hierarchy, but he was just a nice guy. And, you know, some artists, they depend on it. You telling them, here's what you ought to do. Not so much the image, but. Yeah. And then one of the cool stories that I've got, and I think it came out of that group of prints that we did at that time, is, well, let me back up a little bit. I like to give the artist a test stone so they can, you know, try the crayons, try different stuff, and then gives me the opportunity to try the etch, you know, make sure I've got the etches right. And what's really been great is a couple of prints have come out of that, and that wasn't intentional that we would do these, you know, typically a small stone, but they, you know, turned out pretty cool, so why not print them? So we printed Live or Die. That was a test stone, and that was a test stone for Earth World.
I met Earl, we both were showing at Judith Kendall's Phoenix Gallery. He had been showing there for a number of years, and then I came on board. And I met him through that, and then Judith encouraged him to do some prints with me. He was a little rut resistant, and so one time we had lunch and we hit it off. Then he finally did acquiesce and came and worked with me in my studio, and we did a couple of beautiful prints. And then the Harwood portfolio came about. And we would have dinner, and I would go to the studio and pick up his color separations and bring him more plates or bring him more materials and that kind of thing. And he had all these cats all over. He had so much stuff in that house. He was a man of books. He was a super intellectual and very funny kind of character.
Willis F. Lee was a photographer from Texas. He lived in San Antonio, and he had a huge studio doing wall-sized prints and photographs for like oil companies. Came up here to Santa Fe, and Sonny said, well, I call him Sonny, Willis F. Lee. He wanted to come here, and he wanted to make photogravures, but he didn't know printmaking at all. I wanted to do photogravures, but I was not a great photographer. So together we figured out how to do it. And we had a good collaboration, and I did a lot of publications. Because with photogravure, you put a gelatin sheet on a polished copper plate. And there are different ways to do it, but generally you dust it, you dust that plate, and you put an aqua tint on there. And you etch it in a number of different baths, like 3 different baumes, specific gravity of the ferric chloride etchant. And so what happens is you have you get 3 different layers going on a one single copper plate. And one gets etched deeper, the darkest area, the midtones get etched partway down, and then the lightest tones are just like a whisper on the surface. And that traditional photogravure is still, it has the longest straight line curve of any photographic process. It's amazing what you can do with it. It's not as sharp as a silver print, but what you let go of with sharpness, you gain in emotional content.
I think there's so many projects that I've worked on that have really inspired me and pushed me to my limits in so many ways. I have a print over here by Harmony Hammond, and that was a really exciting project for me to be able to work on. She had been working in her paintings with grommet. She and I had talked about brainstorming a publishing project together. And she's someone whose work I've loved for years, who I think is a really important artist. And I was able to figure out a way. We worked together finding a very thick paper and working with grommets, and we actually put grommets through the press, which is not recommended. Wow. But we did it, and we figured out a beautiful way to come up with these kind of grommet-type prints. And we're hammering grommets into the paper, and then they're going through the press. And for me, that's the exciting part, is kind of like problem-solving ways to do things maybe a little differently in printmaking too. My interest has always been working traditionally and then expanding on that as well, and not feeling like there's limits to printmaking.
And that's one reason why Jim Dine decided to come to Tamarind. He loved drawing on stones. He had a hard time finding places that all they wanted was for him to draw on Mylar. And he was like, no, I don't want to draw on Mylar. I want to draw on stones. This is what I do. I like scratching. I like the way I draw is like, I draw something, I take it away, I add, I take away, I add. That's how I work. I don't work just. So, in that respect, it was a big plus for Tamarind. That's how we got Jim to come to Tamarind, and he wound up, liked working there, and we wound up doing projects for about 14 years.
Any printer will agree that printmaking is rooted in problem solving. Replicating an image from a single surface onto multiple sheets of paper can be complicated and time-consuming. Sometimes artists arrive at the print shop with no experience, and the printer's job is to help them modify their vision to suit the medium of printmaking.
Printmaking is problem solving. And so, which is, I think, why I'm so attracted to it. I like to solve puzzles. And when I'm working with an artist and they come to me with an agenda, something that they want to create, I have to figure out how to create their particular image with the tools that I have. And every project is different. And I have to, maybe part of it's going to be a woodcut, part of it's a litho, part of it's a silkscreen, or how I'm going to get their vision to work technically. So that's the challenge, and that's what I really enjoy, the problem solving. That's the fun part.
Well, there was one artist from Taos who is just an airbrush artist, or a pastel artist, and she worked with her fingers with the pastels in it. Great artist. And she came in and she goes, well, what do I do? I said, okay, on the stone, you're going to be, it was a disaster because she was rubbing too hard and you'd roll it up and it was just flat. And I said, why don't you go home for a few days? I said, I've got to figure this out. And that is, it's problem solving. And so I said, how the hell can I get this subtleties that she wants? So it dawned on me, teach her to use an airbrush on Mylar, because you get those soft tones. And if I can get the plate to print these, and it was a great success. As long as the artist was dedicated to what they did and wanted to learn, then I would work my butt off to get them the best print possible. And it did, it worked out.
So I was there about maybe 2 years, and this artist, Roberto Juarez, came. And at the time, he was doing these paintings that were very textural, a lot of like sand and stuff in the paint, and they had a real nice, beautiful texture about them. So he came in, he said, I said, Roberto, I said, what are some of your ideas? He said, well, I want to glue down some peat moss, and then I want to print over that. And I went, huh? I said, peat moss? He said, yeah, I want to get a lot of texture in these prints, you know. He said, how do we do that? I went, well, let me think about that. So I said, well, we can't glue down peat moss and actually run it through the press. I said, because of all that uneven surface, you're not going to get a good impression of whatever we're printing. I said, and plus it will ruin the scraper bar and some of the equipment, you know. I said, so anyway, we came up with the idea of printing on Oriental paper, the litho part of it, and then gluing that down on top of the peat moss. So it was like sandwiched in between. And he was working with this material. It was a latex base urethane. He bought in these gallons from a specific company in New York. And then we did some experiments with it, and it worked great because it made the paper kind of translucent. You know, it fit that, it's like a gesso, you know, it was like a transparent gesso. And so it thinned out, made the paper translucent. You could see through the paper, kind of.
I have always wanted to have a small shop, and so that limits me to the amount of technical equipment I can keep. So I've always worked with other print shops to kind of help produce certain plates that I can't produce here, or certain techniques. Like I did a print with Nicole Eisenman where we did a silk screen background, and then we did a wood block on top. And so we did the silk screen somewhere else, and then we brought it back into the shop and did the wood block in the shop. So it's that kind of thing. Every project has a new set of problems to figure out, and a new set. And when you can't figure it out, that's the nice part about having the community. And New Mexico has such a huge history of printmaking and printmakers here that it's amazing to be able to access that. And it's really important to have that community too.